So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! Over the last couple of weeks, we have talked extensively about the Detroit Lions' biggest needs this offseason. We've talked about the edge rushing position and the best prospects in order to fill up those spots. We've talked about how to address cornerback and the best players to bring in to improve that roster and improve that positional group. And we've even talked about the interior offensive line and the best ways to address those needs. But the Detroit Lions do not have just 2 or 3 needs this offseason. The offseason does not stop at a cornerback one, offensive line depth, and some pass rushers. There are quite a few needs on this roster, and even though those needs might not be met with a top 100 pick or a $10 million check, they are still needs that the Detroit Lions need to address this offseason. And we're going to talk about those sleeper needs today. Positions and spots on the roster that won't be addressed with major contracts, that won't be addressed with major draft assets, that won't be major breaking news, but very well could turn into massive moves either down the road in a couple of years or players that played their role really well and helped the Detroit Lions succeed late in the season when injuries start to arise, when fatigue hits in really hard, and down the stretch of a tough NFL season when some of those depth players truly get a chance to shine. So I have 2 positions today I want to talk about that we haven't really talked about on the channel yet so far, and a couple of prospects and a couple of players that I think could be really good options to fill those roles. So with all of that being said, let's get into the first position, that of course being the tight end position. Now, the Detroit Lions have a phenomenal tight end, right? Rookie Sam Laporta, now going into his second year of NFL play, had arguably the best tight end season for a rookie in NFL history. He was close to 100 receptions. I believe in the postseason, he probably had 100 receptions. He was close to 1,000 receiving yards, including the postseason. He was phenomenal. He, I believe, was tied for second all-time in rookie touchdowns. He was arguably the most complete and all-around, well-rounded rookie tight end season in NFL history. He is phenomenal. He will be the tight end 1, and I think even as a rookie, Sam Laporta is easily already a top 5 tight end in the NFL. But the problems come in when it comes to depth because Brock Wright missed quite a bit of time this year down the stretch of the NFL season, as did James Mitchell, as did Shane Zylstra, and really going into the NFC Championship game, the Detroit Lions were forced to rely on Anthony Frisker to be the tight end 2, and we all saw how that went at the very end of the game when he was given an opportunity to make a play. The Detroit Lions, I think, need some tight end depth. Brock Wright, I think, is a very good blocking tight end. I think he's a very good tight end 3. He's a very clutch player that Jared Goff loves to throw to. But I do think with all of the 12 personnel that the Detroit Lions lose, I do think that with all of the tight ends and all of the different ways that Ben Johnson schemes the tight end open, I think a quality tight end 2 could genuinely put up 3, 4, maybe even 500 yards in this offense. And I think he could be a really massive factor. And unfortunately, I just don't think that Brock Wright and I don't think that James Mitchell are guys that can put those seasons together. I don't think James Mitchell has what it takes to survive an NFL season fully healthy. And I don't think that Brock Wright necessarily has the receiving ability to put up those massive numbers. Now, I do think both will stay on the roster. I think potentially James Mitchell will move down to a tight end 4 to a practice squad role while Brock Wright positions himself as the solidified tight end 3 and a very strong tight end 3 at that. But I do think the Lions can improve at tight end 2. And again, with all of the 12 personnel that they play, with all of the sets that involve 2 tight ends, I think they can improve that position and get a guy that is really, really strong. In free agency, I think there's a couple of guys out there, but I think one player that was very recently released from the Atlanta Falcons could work with a guy like Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith is a 6'3" tight end with really good receiving ability. Last year was the Atlanta Falcons tight end, one with 50 catches, 582 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He is a player that is explosive in the receiving game. I think blocks well enough, and I think as a tight end too in this offense, could put up really, really good production. He probably won't have 50 catches for 500 yards, but I think he could have, 35 catches for 400 yards, right? I don't think that is necessarily a crazy thing to put. If he has, let's say, 30 catch season with 350, 400 yards and 4 touchdowns, that is a great season for a tight end too. And for a position that really he should have been last year, right? He was obviously splitting reps with Kyle Pitts and splitting targets with Kyle Pitts. Jonnu Smith outperformed Kyle Pitts, and I don't think that's going to happen in Detroit, but having a really good player that's seen a lot of volume over the last couple of years, that has put up real proven statistics and real game time efficiency, I think Jonnu Smith could be a really good option. Now, will Jonnu Smith be a little bit more expensive on the free agent tight end spectrum? Absolutely. You're not going to find a guy for 50 catches, 582 yards, and 3 touchdowns to come be a tight end too for very cheap. But I think for the right price, whether that be, $3 to $4 million, Jonnu Smith could be another weapon in this offense, and I think could be a really, really good second tight end option, either for injuries. I think if Sam Laporta does go down, you can trust in Jonnu Smith to, kind of carry that load a little bit, or you just trust Jonnu Smith to beat the second or third string linebacker on pretty much any given rep that he would be covered. Now, taking a look at the draft, because I think obviously drafting is a little bit easier, drafting is a little bit simpler and significantly cheaper. I think Jeremiah Bell from Florida State is the perfect option for the Detroit Lions. He is an incredible athlete, a 6'3" tight end with blazing speed. Last year with Florida State had just 39 catches, but had 503 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air. He's a true vertical threat. He is a phenomenal athlete. He is kind of in that Travis Kelce mold of being a bigger, more athletic tight end. I don't think his blocking ability is necessarily elite. I don't think he's necessarily the greatest blocker, but his vertical threat, the ability he has to stretch the field, and I think the ability he has to strain defenses is going to put him right around that 110, 115 range, somewhere very early in the 4th round. I think if the Detroit Lions want to trade up, I think if the Detroit Lions potentially trade down and get a couple of extra picks in that range, they could either take him at the very bottom of the 3rd round to be a tight end too, or potentially at the very top of the 4th and add an extremely athletic tight end. I think a unicorn athlete in this draft, and really solidify the tight end room with 2 guys that can legitimately go for 500 plus yards a season, right? Sam Laporta obviously at closer to 900 this year, but you could have Sam Laporta go for 900, 800, and Jeremiah Bell go for 400 to 500, and your tight ends right there get you 1,400 receiving yards without even talking about Amon-Ra St. Brown, without talking about Jamo, without talking about potentially Josh Reynolds or Jahmyr Gibbs or any of the other weapons on this offense. And I do think for an offense that finished top 5 in the NFL back-to-back seasons, offense and especially playmakers aren't necessarily the big flashy thing you want to get. But I think depth tight end, I think a tight end that could make some plays through the receiving game could be really nice for the Detroit Lions, just based off of how Ben Johnson likes to use his tight ends. Now, second position I want to talk about today is a position that really is flying under the radar because the starters at this position are elite. Right. We've talked a lot about the interior of the offensive line, what we're going to do with Frank Ragnow if he retires after this season, what we're going to do with Jonah Jackson, what we're going to do after, Graham Glasgow retires in a year or two. But I don't think we're really talking about the exterior of the offensive line nearly as much as we could be. And I think that's the second position of need that we really could be looking at. Now, the Lions offensive tackles under contract next year are Taylor Decker, Penei Sewell, and Connor Galvin. And while I do think they are a pretty good trio, obviously Taylor Decker and Penei Sewell are Pro Bowl, all-pro caliber tackles. Connor Galvin is an undrafted rookie free agent that I was very impressed with last season, but I think you could do a little bit better, and especially with Taylor Decker getting up there in age and price, with Penei Sewell's contract on the line, with, of course, Jonah Jackson and Graham Glasgow being up for contracts this year, with a lot of the upcoming contracts surrounding the Lions. Unfortunately, a year or two down the road, when Taylor Decker's contract expires after the 2025 season, there is a possibility that that is the necessary evil the Lions have to do, and they might have to move on from Taylor Decker. He's going to be 33, I believe 34 after the 2025 season. It's going to be relatively expensive, and with the other contracts on the offensive line, it might be an option to invest now for a tackle that could potentially take over. Now, obviously, the Lions could address this either early or later in the draft. I don't think tackle in the first round is necessarily even out of the picture. A tackle that can either convert from guard to tackle or kind of work both positions. But I think there are some guys at both the top and middle rounds of the draft. At the top of the draft, I think Amarius Mims from Georgia is my favorite option for kind of that late first, early second round. I don't think he gave up a sack at all last year from the numbers that I remember. He is a good size, I believe 6'7". He is a very, very strong tackle for the University of Georgia, and I think will be a great player in the NFL. Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma is another good option. I believe gave up just 1 sack this past season at Oklahoma. And then Jordan Morgan, I believe, gave up 0 sacks at Arizona as 3 players that could potentially be really, really impactful. Obviously, they may not start right away in the NFL, but if you're talking about 2 or 3 years down the line when Taylor Decker's gone, you potentially either move Penei Sewell to left tackle and let one of those guys stay at right tackle, or of course, they just take over at right tackle after 2 years of getting to train. But I also think there are some good options later in the draft, including Blake Fisher, the Notre Dame right tackle. He's kind of the counterpart to Joe Alt. Joe Alt obviously is going to be a top 10 pick in this NFL draft. Blake Fisher gave up 3 sacks this past season with Notre Dame, but only gave up 9 quarterback pressures on the year. So really, I thought he was very solid for Notre Dame. He played primarily right tackle, so that's a position, again, you can move Penei back to left and have Blake Fisher potentially develop as the right tackle of the future. You have Matt Goncalves, I believe is how you say it, from Pittsburgh. He gave up 0 sacks for Pittsburgh last season and was very strong at the right tackle position. But my favorite mid-round pick, and a player that's projected to go around the 115 to 130, 145 range, is Javon Foster from Missouri, a 6'7" left tackle that has played purely left tackle for his entire career, did not give up a sack last season at Missouri, was phenomenal in the run game, was phenomenal in the passing game, has a higher PFF grade than any of the tackles we've talked about today. And I think he could be a really good long-term developmental guy that you take in the 3rd round, that you take in the 4th round, that 2 years down the road will slide in as that left tackle and be just as good as Taylor Decker and move forward on the rest of his rookie contract and, of course, going through the remainder of his career. But with that being said, I do think offensive tackle is a big need. I do think offensive tackle is a position that the Lions do need to address this offseason. And I don't think that there's going to be a whole lot of talent. I think there's going to be a whole lot of quality in free agency. So I think the draft is the best way to attack it. I think those are the best 6 prospects for the Detroit Lions to tackle. Well, with all that being said, that is all for you guys today. Let me know your sleeper positions down in the comments below. If there's a position we're not talking about, if there's a position that, we still haven't talked about, whether you think the linebacking core needs some work, the wide receiving core needs some work, the, quarterback room potentially, or, the safety room or whatever it may be. If there's a position we haven't talked about yet and you think it's a big need for the Lions to address, let me know down in the comments below. And of course, let me know your biggest targets for the tight end and offensive tackle position this offseason. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so very much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.